They do fantastic ones for cinema, for live production. It's really quite impressive, and some of you have used those cameras. So I'll hand it off to
Perfect.
Chase and have at it.
Great. Thanks, Bobby. Appreciate it. Great. So yeah, I'm going to give you a great overview of some of the, I should say, challenges that we've experienced using cinematic cameras specifically for live production. And I know we hear a lot of this word cinematic, and I kind of wanted to define initially what that word cinematic means. And to us at ARRI, it means something like an image like this, where you have an incredible high dynamic range, you have the ability to have very low noise with larger photo sites, and you have true colors that really render in an accurate but yet still cinematic and pleasing way. So images like that can be captured on a variety of cinema cameras. In this case, this was the weekend for the Super Bowl 2021. It was captured pretty much exclusively on ARRI cameras for that halftime show. And again, before we get into some of the challenges and some of the insights, I also want to talk about what makes cinematic imaging in terms of the different aspects that you can see visually. One of those has to do with the sensor size. So a larger sensor produces, as you all know, a shallower depth of field. So this is actually the same shot with a Super 35 sensor at 125 millimeter focal length and shot with a 2/3 inch sensor at a 50 millimeter focal length. And you can see even though they look similar in terms of field of view, the depth of field is incredibly, incredibly different. In fact, you can't open up wide enough on any 2/3 inch lens to create anything like the shallow depth of field you see on a Super 35 sensor. And as ARRI, we've been around for many, many years. As you all know, we started when it came to building film cameras, using different kinds of motion picture films from a variety of manufacturers. But when we transitioned to digital, it wasn't just overnight. We started with digital intermediate products like the ARRI scanner and of course ARRI laser as well. So when we scanned this film negative, we learned a lot about the different characteristics of a variety of different negatives when it came to color, grain, reproduction in terms of structure, noise characteristics, how that would map to a digital sensor compared to the film grain. So we have a lot of expertise coming from the analog to digital realm. And this is, I think, the most important thing, right? Because the first question I get asked a lot is, why would you use a cinematic camera for live production? What are some of the reasons, the drive and the direction? This actually comes from two different quotes back at some FCVG summits back, I think, in early 2022. They've been, talked about again and again in a very similar vein, but you can see there from Jason Cohen at CBS Sports. Those shallow depth field of camera is one of those quick fire reactions that the Twitterverse locked onto, right? So when they were first using those larger sensor cameras, people on Twitter were like, oh my God, that's an 8K camera or this camera or that camera. And obviously the general public didn't realize that it actually had nothing to do with resolution per se, but those larger sensors created a shallower depth of field that looked far more cinematic, for example. And you can see a different quote there from Mike Davies at Fox Sports. These are not captured images. These are actually images from Madden, one of the games that you can purchase on a variety of different consoles. This is from Madden 2021 NFL. So with years and years and years, obviously the games improve in terms of their image quality, their dynamic lighting, shallow depth of field, as you can see from that image, especially there on the left. So the drive and direction doesn't come from just, we want to do it for, just because we can. It comes from the idea of grabbing new, younger audiences that expect sequences in live entertainment like sports, for example, in this example, that they look more cinematic because they have that shallow depth of field, that cinematic lighting, that motion cadence, and that quality. So now let's talk about the Pentagon of 5 challenges, if you will, when it comes to using cinematic cameras in live environments. And the first one is actually nothing to do with specific technology. It actually has to do with the decision makers involved in the process. So as ARRI, we know the cinematic workflow very, very well. Cinematic workflow, of course, you have a script and a director of photography, a digital imaging technician on set. Maybe if you're lucky enough and you have a big enough budget, you have an on-set colorist that will do some tweaking of the images there for you. You also have a camera operator that's dedicated and a first AC or a focus puller. In the broadcast workflow, it's obviously very different. You have a director working with a technical director, a video operator V1, and a camera operator that are all a little more segmented than you would find on a traditional cinema set, for example. Part of the decision process that we also want to look at is choosing the technology. So for the film style workflow, we have a director and a director of photography working very closely together to define the look of the images that they're going to be capturing. So that has to do with the lens choice, the focus. Do they want a shallow depth of field, a deep depth of field? They want it, what kind of lighting? Do they want soft lighting? Do they want very contrasty lighting? And what do they want the color rendition or the look or the LUT to look like for their piece, for example? Now, if we look at the broadcast workflow, that's completely different. You have your broadcaster and your network, your truck company, and your production crew, and they're, segmented again. So you can see there, one of the topics when it comes to broadcast style workflows is generally resolution and frame rate, right? What frame rate are we going to deliver? Are we going to deliver in 1080p or UHD, maybe HDR, SDR? Then, of course, one of the things that you're looking at when you're crafting images for broadcast is what you're going to have in terms of number of cameras. Where can my cameras be? Number of camera positions, of course, and the lens focal range, right? So you're trying to make sure that your camera positions and your lensing will allow you to get the images you want for live, right? Because you can't just say, hey, we're going to cut and move the camera. That doesn't really work when you're doing live. Now, another part of that decision-making process that's very, very different is the choice of lenses, right? So for a film style workflow, you have pre-production and lens tests done by directors of photography, usually in coordination with the director. They'll take a look at some of the tests that the DP shoots, for example. And of course, when it comes to lens choices, there's a lot of options. You can choose spherical lenses or anamorphic lenses, zoom lenses or prime lenses across both. And there's a variety of different manufacturers that make lenses. There's actually a lot more these days, but I kind of just put some of the top ones there. And all those lenses have different characteristics. Some of them can even be modified, like lenses at Panavision, or even us as ARRI. We have some lenses that can be detuned. So that's a very different way of approaching the workflow when it comes to glass. For the broadcast workflow, it's very different. The outside broadcast is saying, okay, we're going to hire a truck company. We have these angles that we want to capture, this many different camera positions. And most of the lens choices are dictated by the zoom range. And you have just two manufacturers that make lenses in that kind of a workflow. So very, very different. They're not choosing the lenses necessarily based on the aesthetic representation or preference, if you will. Next part of the decision-making process, so again, looking at the film style, we have a look or LUT. In pre-production, the director of photography and director will work closely together with a colorist to design a 3D LUT that will then be loaded into the cameras. Now, also, there's some cases where the director of photography might want to see different LUTs on set for different scenes, maybe a flashback, or maybe they didn't have time to build a custom LUT, so they might use some existing ones on the camera, and they might work with the on-set colorist to tweak some of those LUTs that they made in pre-production or in post. In broadcast, it's very different. You use a RCP, OCP for painting the camera, and often this is done to match different cameras with different lenses in different positions to each other. The idea is to unify the cameras so they look similar while cutting between them. So they will use different kinds of charts, for example. You've got an entirely different system with your black and white, red, green, blues, and your vector scopes as tools to see if that color is lining up correctly with charts, something that you generally don't really find in that film style process. The next challenge, so we're moving to focus, is very simple. It's focus. As you all know, a larger imaging sensor has a much shallower depth of field, making focus very, very tricky. The bigger the sensor, the trickier that gets. So with a film style workflow, there's different tools. So for example, as ARRI, we have tools that we've developed over the years, wireless focus systems, but also things like controlled grips. Those ones you see there, they're called the master grips. They can be used for handheld and also tripod-based, pedestal-based shooting. But also, in addition to the control grips that are being used, there's also a variety of different aids like focus devices. This one's called the Cine RT system. It's a bug that the talent wears that emits an ultrasonic pulse that allows basically focus pullers to get some data of how far away that actor or subject that's wearing that focus bug system is from the camera. You have laser range finders. You also have ultrasonic distance measurers that don't rely on the actors or actresses wearing bugs. So there's a variety of different tools that you could call focus aids. For broadcast workflow, very different. Obviously, a smaller sensor has inherently a deeper depth of field, making focus a little bit more forgiving, and they use different set of tools, very traditional, mostly unchanged servo demands, from our friends at Fuji and Canon that have a zoom rocker and a focus knob. One of those challenges with focus is telling when something is in focus, right? So, there's different kinds of focus tools, and one of them that I think, we happen to do very well is that we have a variety of different focus tools. such as aperture-based focus peaking and color-based focus peaking. And color-based focus peaking is going to highlight what the area of contrast is in a specific color, often with some adjustable intensity and a variety of different colors. And if you're wondering why I'm showing this specific example, one of the things that I think makes our camera systems very unique is we understand the challenge of focus. We, understand that very well. So we've designed the cameras to have a variety of different focus color for peaking. So most cameras have, maybe red, yellow, blue, and a high, medium, or low intensity. In our cameras, we actually have 6 different colors plus white. I didn't have a good example of white, so that's actually the 7th color. And then we have an aperture-based peaking, and with that, you can actually adjust the peaking from a level of 1 to 20. So you have 20 adjustable steps in this peaking, which I think is pretty cool. But focus aids, whatever you can give the operator, as an aid, I think they're really going to appreciate that when it comes to pulling focus in Super 35. Another challenge is color. So when we look at color, obviously different cinema cameras have different tonal curves and gamma encoding curves, depending on how they're going to roll off the highlights, how they're going to, affect the shadows. And they're not the same as a traditional ITU 709 broadcast camera. In fact, back in the day when Alexa was launched in 2010, we had to write a white paper explaining why the Alexa doesn't look correct on a chroma Dumont chart, because we're not clipping those whites as aggressively as in a traditional ITU 709 curve. We're really rolling them off like a highlight retention of a film negative. So we have these little graphs that you can find in that white paper from many years ago, just explaining how we're preserving those highlights, as you can see there on the right, compared to aggressively clipping them there on the left. Another challenge with color, right, is talking the right language. So when we look at, traditional broadcast cameras, we of course have a Ni, we have gamma, we have black gamma. In our cameras, we call something called a video look parameter. It's kind of similar to a matrix. We don't have an actual multi-matrix, but those VLP parameters allow us to combine these two aspects. And what we're really looking at is we're essentially combining these two to create what is a LUT. So we hear that term a lot, a LUT, a LUT, a LUT, a lookup table. The lookup table is intentionally encompassing all of what you see here into one single piece. So when it comes to color, the hard part, of course, is trying to decide, well, what is the intention of the creative, right? Whether it's the director of photography, who the stakeholder per se, what is that intention? So if you can see here, we have an image. It's not graded, so the painted image on the right will change, but the image on the left is just the standard look or LUT. And you can see, obviously, when it comes to painting, usually that's being chosen and controlled by the video operator. It's not being chosen by the director or the director of photography of how it's supposed to look. They're painting, independently to try to match cameras to each other, and that's necessary when it comes to many broadcast or 2/3-inch cameras. But let's say you start a show and the director says, well, that's what I want it to look like, and the V1, let's say, is starting to paint it and adjust it, and they're starting to really deviate from the intended creative intention of that the key stakeholders, so they can get all over the place when it comes to how they're painting the cameras. So it can become very tricky to maintain a cohesive look for the stakeholder, like let's say the director of photography, where they say, this is what I want the images to look like. I don't want them to be painted in such a way where, they're not what I intended. So for ARRI, what we've always worked with is something called LUTs, of course, which is something that we've had built into our cameras for many years. And so one of the tools that we've built that we find a lot of live entertainment customers like to use is the ARRI Look Library, because they might not have time to sit down with a professional colorist and build their own LUT. But what we offered starting back in 2017 is 87 different looks, and at the time they were in 3 intensities, high, medium, and low. In our newer cameras, they're actually offered in 9 different intensities in the Alexa 35, the latest generation ARRI cameras. And so these are all pre-built into the camera right out of the box. They were designed by our professional colorists in Munich, by our color and image science team. So that quickly allows you to say, hey, we're going to go shoot today, and we're going to use, let's say, 8170. That's a 1970s look. And then in the previous cameras, like I said, high, medium, low. Newer cameras, you have even more adjustment. So that allows you to walk onto a job and say, here's our creative intent. Here's what we're going to get. This is what we're going for, without having to build a LUT from scratch. Of course, if you have your own LUTs, you can use those as well. Connectivity, right? Another challenge is that cinema cameras have very different connectivity and different, orientation when it comes to where the connectors are, the kind of connectors, the number of connectors, because they were designed for film sets with camera assistants and different ways of working. So over there on the left, if you can believe it, that is actually an ARRI mirror covered in literally everything in the kitchen sink, from focus systems to map boxes and motors and all of that. And that's a very typical film production setup, right? The film people don't really bat an eye at that kind of a setup. But when we go to our broadcast style customers, they go, what the heck is that? That's not what it should look like. So the idea here is to try to merge the two worlds, right? So we want to create something that's got the utility and simplicity of a broadcast camera setup and the robustness, of course, but also has the ability to be expanded with a variety of additional tools like you might find in a film production setup. So that's the bottom image is really kind of our goal, and I think what's ideal in this kind of environment. Again, talking about connectivity, we talked to camera controls, so RCP, OCP, some kind of camera control to control the iris, for example. That's just simple lens control, but also color. So, for example, adjusting a 3D LUT or painting a camera from scratch, even doing things like ASC CDL values, right? So when we talk to cinematographers, they don't speak in multi-matrix. They say, oh yeah, here I have my ASC CDL values that I want to adjust. And most RCPs obviously don't understand that. So it's a trick to try to bring some of these aspects of controls into a broadcast-friendly environment in terms of the interface and an RCP-style environment that they're used to, and also record start-stop playback, right? Because cinema cameras can record internally. So if you don't have record start-stop playback, you're relying on the operator. Hey, did you hit record? Did you not hit record? Do you have the clip on the cards for post for the future? So integrating all of this into an RCP, obviously, that normally is not designed for this, is a bit of a challenge. The next topic is training. It's a very simple one, right? So at ARRI, we've gone through many different kinds of transitions from different kinds of film cameras all the way to the latest and greatest digital cameras. And that's one of the biggest challenges we find, right, is that there's different customers that are very familiar with, let's say, Cine, or very familiar with live entertainment, broadcast, and what they really need is some classes and some training to get them up to speed in the feature set and the advantages and the differences between what they're used to and what is possible with the latest and greatest technology. So I think training is one that can't be underestimated whatsoever. And so we constantly get that, when we're getting customers saying, well, I'm used to this kind of camera system. Can you come out and do a training? Or we're going to purchase some stuff. Can you come out doing a training? That's a key sense. You can't just say, oh, it's a camera. You just put a lens on it and it's the same. You can run off to the races. That has never been the case in our experience when we're trying to cross over both worlds. Now, there's a lot of challenges, but you can do it successfully. There's just a few examples I like to point out. This is Coachella from 2019. Director Kenny Stoff, we were on the second stage there, the outside stage, the second largest stage there, back in 2019, and some incredible results. I actually have this. If we want to watch it maybe at the end, I'm generally not supposed to show it to too many people, but we can watch it if you'd like. And then the Super Bowl halftime show in 2021, that was Hamish Hamilton. That was some of the examples I showed you earlier with The Weeknd. And then Billy Joel recently, just there in Madison Square Garden with Paul there, and that was with Alexa 35 and Mini LF. And those were with our Alexa Mini and Amiras over on the left. So just real quick, again, this is not here just to be a product presentation. So what have we learned? I kind of explained the challenges. What are we doing as ARRI? We've developed the latest and greatest, which we call the Alexa 35 Live camera system. It's based on our Alexa 35 flagship Super 35 camera. It's designed to be future-proof with the ARRI look in Super 35 HDR, and it's fully featured in terms of a fiber solution with SMPTE 2110 for seamless integration for live production, right? So we turned everything we learned, all those challenges. We've had previous products like the Amira and the Amira Live, and we've bundled it into this next generation product. So yeah, it's really a kind of an amalgamation of everything we've learned over the years. And I do want to mention that we don't just make cameras, we make lenses, we make accessories, we make camera support systems, including the Trinity and the Trinity Live and the remote head that you can see down there that was used for the Paul Van Dyke at the top of the tower there in Dubai for a New Year's celebration back in 2020 to 2021. So we make a lot of different products that still integrate in the live ecosystem, including lighting as well. So for some of you who know ARRI, you might know the lighting side of us, including Clay Packey, which is now an ARRI brand, and they do a lot of live entertainment for concert lighting and things like that. So this is the Alexa 35 Live multicam system. We introduced it back at NAB last year. It includes the Alexa 35 camera body and camera fiber adapter and base station. So we've named that the LPS1, or the Live Production System 1. And then, as part of the system, you'll need an RCP, of course. So we have a partnership that we were working with our friends at Skarhoy in Denmark. So if anyone knows Skarhoy, they've got a lot of different great little tools, including a very nice RCP that we feel is a good match for our system. We do work with other RCPs as well. And then, of course, in a true ARRI fashion, nothing is complete without a bunch of camera accessories, including some nice bits and bobs we'll chat about in a moment. So for those of you who are wondering, it's the same exact front end in terms of camera hardware as our traditional Cinema Alexa 35. It's got a Super 35 sensor with over 17 stops of dynamic range to handle any lighting situation. So we'll see some examples about how that could be useful for bright sun, of course, in sports events and dark conditions. And it gives you the best high dynamic range images that you expect from an ARRI camera. It also integrates the next generation ARRI color science, which we've named Reveal. So we've named that color science because we're really excited and proud about how much of an improvement is. As you probably know, ARRI cameras are already well renowned for their color, but I'll show you some differences that I think you'll find quite interesting. So you get the best images in any lighting environment, and it's the best skin tones in the business to make your talent look great, right? We've heard that from, there's actually an actress in South Korea that she has in her contract, she can only be photographed digitally with ARRI cameras because she doesn't like the way her skin looks in any other environment. So good for her. This is a great image of HDR, right? So this is an image you'd expect from a standard 2/3-inch camera with a very limited dynamic range. It's very difficult to capture shadows and highlights in a stadium where light is pouring through. But imagine if you had images closer to this with that amazing dynamic range of our LF4 sensor with the Alexa 35 Live. Images like this, where it's incredibly challenging, can become images more like this, where you have that incredible highlight retention that we're known for. Then we, of course, talk about color. So Reveal Color Science was introduced with the Alexa 35, and of course featured in the Alexa 35 Live. The new color science has a lot of improvements. So one of them includes the next generation ARRI debayering algorithm for even better images when it comes to very fine detail like hair, edges, for example. So we've reworked that with the latest hardware to have an even better debayer from the sensor to a processed image, whether it's SDI out or ProRes recording, for example. We have a new ARRI color engine that actually simulates the human visual system, including some of the defects. For example, our perception of brightness versus hue, where that kind of changes the tracking of how hues change based on the brightness of the color. So that has all been part of the next generation ARRI color engine 4 that takes the native camera RGB data from our Super 35 Bayer pattern and encodes it into the next ARRI color gamut that we're calling ARRI Wide Gamut 4. So just so you can see, ARRI Wide Gamut 4 exceeds Rec 2020, so you have plenty of room to play around, and it fits within ASUS APO0, making it very friendly with an ASUS post-production environment. We also had to build a new log curve. Now, at ARRI, we don't change things just to change things. The older log curve that we now call log C3 could only encode about 15 stops of dynamic range. I know, not too bad. But when we needed to push it to 17 stops for the next camera, the Alexa 35, with its LF4 that could hold those 17 stops, we have a new log curve to be able to hold all that tonal information in there. So that was introduced, again, with the Alexa 35, and we're calling that log C4. If you're wondering, log C, how you heard it before, has just been renamed log C3. So we're going back and renaming it. There was, you don't need to worry about what was the 1 and the 2. It's just old log C is log C3, new log C is log C4. So I know it's a little confusing, but hopefully not too much. We also have a new standard display transform, so we actually tweaked the default ARRI rendering. Obviously, we were known for great skin tones right out of the box, but like anything ARRI, we can always improve. So we looked at the new color gamut, which is ARRI Wide Gamut 4, and we looked how we would transform that very carefully to encode as much as possible, even in a limited gamut like Rec 709. So this is a great image. I know this projector might not be perfectly calibrated, but you should still be able to see a difference. Over there on the left, again, award-winning color science since 2010, since Alexa. Still great color, I think, but you can see the Germans didn't just rest on their laurels. They wanted to improve it. So we improved the default ARRI 709 LUT from our previous cameras to the new Reveal rendering there, where we tweaked it so it's a little less green, a little better contrast, a little better saturation. So that's our new default look in the Reveal color science. And if you want to see some what I call torture tests, right? This was my favorite example. The German said, this is the difference. They were showing you the difference. It's side by side. And we said, do you have any other images? They said, we don't have any. We're working on a color chart. And we said, you know what? Let's send out a cinematographer, shoot in a torture test, and really see the differences between the old color science, which, again, was award-winning, and the new color science. So this is a great example. This is a torture scene. There's almost no white light whatsoever except for that bulb over there. It's got colored brake lights, colored signs, neon, all that kind of stuff. So we shot this at a stage over here in Burbank, and you can see it doesn't look bad, but there's some, tricky colors that are hard to render. So if I go to the new color science, you can see just how improved the rendering is. The old color science, again, wasn't bad, but when it came to colors, there's a lot less subtlety to some of these really saturated purples, for example, when they're bouncing off the ground. Whereas here, it looks a lot more closer to what my eye would actually see there. For example, the brake lights on that motorcycle are a perfect blood red compared to slightly off where we skewed a little bit magenta back in the day to keep everything looking as best as we could. Remember, the old color science was designed in 2010, which is now 14 years old. So again, as the Germans like to say, it's the best we could do back then, kind of thing. And we have room for improvement. This is a great example too. So this is, again, I think in this scene, there's actually literally no white light. They're being lit by a purple light. And you can see that, it's not a bad image, but it's very difficult to tell what color shirt he's wearing. The skin tones are a little off. And if we look here with the reveal color science, you can see how much of an improvement that is in very challenging, saturated situations with colored light. Again, old color science was great, especially with skin in normal lighting, but when it gets to colored LED lights that weren't really in existence in 2010, that's, room for improvement. The next feature that's related to the Alexa 35 is something called textures. So you all know sharpening skin detail from a broadcast camera. We don't do that in the ARRI world. We want to give you natural, good-looking images out of the box, but we had customers saying, I used to have different film stocks. Some were sharper, some were softer, some were grainier. Could I get that in the camera? So with the Alexa 35, we decided to offer something called textures. And textures allow you to change the default rendering of the camera, similar in ways to detail and sharpness control, but taking it even a step further. They don't affect color textures. They affect more the general rendering of contrast, micro contrast, and grain, if you will, or noise. So over there, you can see the default ARRI rendering. It's nice, it's sharp, it's not overly sharp, and it's what we call our K445. We started giving them numbers like film stocks. But let's say you were shooting an actor or an actress where there was some imperfections in the skin. You could use, for example, the cosmetic texture, which is going to soften the micro contrast details. Not going to affect the macro contrast or the grain, but the micro contrast will be reduced with that cosmetic texture. So again, it's like an alternate way of doing that. There's also the texture called clarity. We have actually clarity and high clarity. I like to go to 11 and show you the difference with the high clarity. But you can see the default texture isn't soft by any means, but it's not accentuating that micro contrast, because obviously if you were shooting an actor or actress, you don't want to see the pores of their skin. However, maybe you were shooting a landscape and you would want to really accentuate that fine detail, so you might use something like the high clarity texture. This one is a very favorite. This is our nostalgic texture. It's designed to replicate the grain structure and look of 35mm motion picture stock. And so you can see the difference between the K445 stock default and the G733 nostalgic. It has lower macro contrast, lower micro contrast, and a much more pronounced grain structure. The grain structure, however, is not noise. It's monochromatic. So it's not sensor noise. It's actually a grain structure that's added to the images to look like 35mm motion picture stock. So these are all available in camera. Again, we talked about the look license. We even have broadcast textures specific that will be a little bit more on the sharpening side. So we have 5 of different ones of those, actually 6 technically, 0 through 5. We, of course, support all the look files in the camera. So if you have your own LUTs or you want to use the look library, we even built some multicam LUTs. So we had our colorists sit down in Munich at the launch of the 35 Live, and we now have a talk show look, a game show look, a winter sports look, and a sunny stadium. So we put them to work to make it even better. Just in terms of general feature set for Alexa 35 Live, if you're wondering, the camera is capable out of the box with the default configuration of up to 60 frames per second in UHD, output and internal recording. It's fitted with a PL mount with a Hiroshi connection for broadcast style servo lenses from Canon and Fuji. It records internally in ProRes in a variety of different flavors, and it's got a great feature set. However, there are some customers that might want the entire feature set of the Alexa 35, including ARRI RAW, anamorphic recording, all those extra bobs and bits. and you can also have that. You can purchase what we call the Cine license, and then you get the full feature set of the Alexa 35 to do anamorphic, ARRI raw, open gate, all that fun stuff. So one of the big things that we wanted to make sure that the camera could do was standalone operation. So obviously with traditional, more broadcast, or even some of our previous or competitor products, everything was affixed together, right? It was essentially a fiber studio camera that you could power with batteries, but it wasn't really ideal because it was just not designed that way. So with the 35 Live, we wanted to make sure that you could actually make it a more portable and flexible system to put it in something like a camera stabilizer, which you see there. That's our Trinity product that could be used to capture something like on a Steadicam or on a gimbal. So what we designed the Alexa 35 Live to do is, because the front end is just a regular Alexa 35 hardware, we can allow you with just 3 screws, takes maybe 5 minutes, and the camera will undock from the fiber back end, becoming just a standalone, fully, encompassing camera with recording capabilities and all of that. So it's just 3 screws and you're off to the races. That part's we call the LPS1 fiber camera adapter. And so that's got all your I/O and connections, as you can tell, and you'll be able to see in a moment. There's lots of ports and goodies back there, and it simply docks onto the back of the Alexa 35 camera, or 35 Live in this case, and you have a single cable just for Ethernet, because we couldn't quite get to the Ethernet port over there, so we had to run a really small but rugged LEMO jumper cable for camera control. So you can see here on the back, we kind of spared no expense and feature when it comes to I/O. So you've got all of your intercom, features, your level controls, your dials for return in pass, lots of XLRs. It actually has an entire auxiliary fiber trunk, so you can actually run tactical dark fiber through an Alexa 35 Live chain from a completely separate camera system, and it'll pump it down the fiber back to the base station. So you can actually run 2 cameras right next to each other, one dark fiber and one with the 35 Live's trunk. You've got a bunch of power outputs. You've got your SDI outputs. You have a 12G auxiliary trunk that's bidirectional. You've got your return outputs, your reference outputs. You have an entire Gig-E Ethernet trunk that's separated from the camera control, so you could run a Gig-E PTZ camera right on top of your 35 Live down the same fiber chain with its own separate Ethernet path. I mean, again, the Germans went kind of crazy with this one, and it's great. So all the I/O you need. Again, they looked at it and said, how can we make it better? Because we were trying to improve on everything that we had seen out there in the market. So, I mean, you all know, and you find this, of course, in the manual and on the brochure, but you can see I don't think we're missing any connectors. Last I checked, I've never had anyone say, you're missing that. They're all just surprised that we offer it. And here's how it looks there on the back. Like I mentioned, now you have your standard 311 SEMTI connector over there that'll do your power, and of course everything else as well. This is what the base station looks like. It is a dual rack unit base station. It actually has 2 power supplies, including a backup one. The power supplies are incredibly robust. It can do up to 400 watts of power, and it can power an Alexa 35 up to 2 kilometers away from the base station. So really incredible. I know we don't generally run 2 kilometers of 311, but it's technically possible. You have 4 returns in, 15 simultaneous SDI outputs, including 3G, 6G, and 12G. You've got obviously simultaneous UHD and HD. You have 2110 as well, and of course Ethernet control and a number of trunks as well. And it does do the SEMTI 2110 2022-7, so it runs 2 2110 networks, so it's a redundant one in case one goes down. This is what the back of the lovely base station looks like with its redundant power supply. You can see there, it's got a port on the front for connecting an RCP. It's got a little menu interface with a color display and a nice little knob so you can navigate through it. But everything, designed and made in Germany with the quality you would expect. And there's all the connectors and outputs and all that good stuff. We even run LBus, which is the ARRI lens control system. So for example, if you wanted to use a cinema lens with motors on it, but you wanted to control it back at the truck, you could connect an ARRI control wireless, in this case it would be wired, but ARRI hand unit for lens control back at the truck, and you could do it there instead of having let's say, an assistant near the camera. Full control, right? So we need an interface panel. Again, we're talking, you know, the Scarhoy is what we feel is the best solution. They've been very good partners with us over many years, and I think they make very good products. So it allows you to do full live painting, as with other RCPs. You've got the ability to change frame rate, do record, start, stop, for example, playback control, because obviously the cameras record to a memory card, so you can trigger clip playback. You can select your look files, your textures, your camera setup files, your settings, and you can even do zoom and focus remotely as well. You've got your ASC CDL values and your RGB slope, offset, and power, which is what that is. And tint control, right? That's another one. I mean, for those of you who come from cinema, DPs don't talk and, oh, I need a little more green, a little more magenta. They're talking about, when they're saying that, I should say, they're talking about tint control that they're used to in a motion picture camera, and this RCP can speak in tint, and it's PoE and all that good stuff. So of course, in addition to using an RCP, you can of course build a 3D LUT, you know, export it as an ARRI look file, load it into the camera. It won't be baked into the footage, so the footage will always contain the metadata of the look used at the time of recording, but it will not bake it into the logarithmic recorded image. And then of course, it will output out of the SDIs and through the base station any of these look files that you load, just as if you were painting it. It's very easy setup and configuration. We designed it in such a way that it's simple, ARRI, easy to use in terms of signal strength, camera index numbers, all that kind of stuff. And we have a web GUI for not only our camera for full camera control, but we also have an entire web GUI including the routing structure of all the outputs on the back of the base station. So you get a GUI of what SDI is doing what laid out in front of you. You can click on it and say, I want to change that SDI output to be 3G, 12G, whatever you want. And even the Scarhoy actually has a virtual interface. So if you wanted to have a virtual RCP, you could, but also you can reconfigure every single button on that Scarhoy RCP. They've got different RGB lights behind them. You can change the label of the buttons because they have little OLED screens above each button, and you can change the color of all the bulbs. Last little bits about the camera, multicam accessories. Again, in the ARRI world, we make a lot of different pieces, so we wanted to make a complete camera system, and that includes accessories like a very bright tally light module. That tally light is incredibly bright with a nice big camera index number. You've got red, green, and yellow tallies. You've got a live production handle designed, for easy, grabbing the camera and mounting the monitor. We've got a monitor yoke support. We've got a quick touchdown system. It's all our alternative to a VTC plate, although you can use that as well. And we have mounts for quick mounting into a Steadicam. This is what the configuration looks like in a very basic manner with our 7-inch camera control monitor. We call it the CCM1. And then this is it in a more studio environment. But we didn't stop there. We also decided to make an LLA, a long lens adapter. Our friends at Canon and Fuji do make long lens adapters, but they are not optimized for a Super 35 camera system like the Alexa 35 in terms of the height adjustment and centering. So we decided to design a system that with literally no effort, you can slide in an Alexa 35. This is the locking lever here. It's a simple push action, and this pressure plate will put pressure on either side and completely lock in the Alexa 35 right into any PL mount lens, box lens, for example, the 25 to 1000 from Fuji, and that's it in a kind of complete configuration. This is it with an actual box lens out there on set. And the LLA's got a bunch of cool little accessories too. For example, we also have the ability to translate the protocol of a box lens into an ARRI lens control protocol so it can be controlled remotely from 100 miles away via IP. And then we have a variety of different plates as well for other ARRI cameras so they can quickly mount to it. Now, I know you're thinking, what about robustness and reliability? Cinema cameras are generally considered perhaps not as robust and reliable as broadcast cameras, and that used to be the case. Sometimes it's still the case for certain cameras, but not ARRI cameras. They are robust and reliable from -4 to 113 degrees Fahrenheit operating temperature, and every single ARRI camera manufactured is tested in Munich for 1 hour at 113 degrees recording, 1 hour at -4 degrees while recording, and then shook on a shaker to simulate 200 miles of cobblestone road before it's ever delivered to customer, every single serial camera that leaves the factory. So also we have global service network. So we have service providers all over the world across ARRI subsidiaries. And we have global service, meaning that if you buy an ARRI camera from us here at ARRI Americas and you show up in Germany and you have an issue, the full warranty and full service can be done there. You're not going to be, oh, well, you have to send it back to the US because you didn't buy it from ARRI Germany, for example. So it's a global service network provider. So really, really nice about that. And yeah, that's kind of a summary, a complete production tool set for the requirements based on all those challenges I mentioned before. Nothing's perfect. We think we've gotten, pretty close. But the idea is to really take all of that knowledge and feedback from customers and build it into a product like the Alexa 35 Live. And that's the key word, I think, here. It's